You're listening to Uncoupled and Unfiltered, the show for people smart enough to get out of the wrong relationship and bold enough to do it without losing their damn minds. Hosted by Ksenia Mensch, a divorce strategist and straight-talking badass, this podcast is your no-fluff, no-shame, take-control guide to surviving litigated divorce with clarity, guts, and zero regrets. Let's get into it. Here's Ksenia.
Welcome back to Uncoupled and Unfiltered, the podcast where we get real about breakups, betrayal, and finding your footing when what seems like your entire world is falling apart. Today, I'm chatting with Vicky Stark, psychotherapist, trauma specialist, and author of Runaway Husbands. If you've ever been blindsided by a partner who emotionally checked out or even walked away completely, this conversation will hit home. We will dive into why some people disappear instead of dealing with conflict, the psychology behind sudden abandonment, and what it's really like for those left behind. So grab a drink, get comfy, and let's get uncoupled and unfiltered. Vicky, thank you so much for being here with us today on such a dreary day in California.
Well, it's actually a very sunny day in Montreal, which is rare in December, but I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. I'm really curious about today's conversation because my entire business is based on working with women who left someone behind and they're trying to break free of their hold. But today we talk from a different perspective for women on the receiving end of being left behind. So
Yes.
what is that like? I know it's based on your true story. So can we talk about first what inspired you to write Runaway Husbands?
Yes. Okay. I'm more than happy to talk about that. So
Thank
first
you.
of all, I'm a family therapist and I have been a marriage counselor and a divorce counselor for many, many years. And I had been married for 21 years with my adorable, loving, very engaged husband who was very present, very affectionate, everything perfect, until the day he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "It's over." And so the story was that I had been on the road for 23 days doing a book tour for my first book, which is about
Mm-hmm.
sister relationships. So I'd been away from home for 23 days, driving down the East Coast and the West Coast and going to the middle of the country and talking at bookstores and things. And then I arrived home and he drove me home and he went off to work. And I was getting unpacking and doing laundry and all of that. And I noticed this big long hair. See how short my hair is in the bathtub.
Mm.
And I didn't think anything of it, but I called my daughter, one of my daughters who has very long hair. I said, "Have you been at the house while I was away?" And she said, "No, I haven't been there." And I'm so trusting, I didn't think a thing of it. And that night, when he got home from work, I threaded my arm through his and I said to him, "I bought fish." And he said, "It's over." And I said,
Ooh.
"Okay, if you don't want fish, I think we have chicken." And he said, "No, it's over. I'm leaving you. The marriage is over and I'm moving out right now." And that was the only discussion that we had. And I
Mm.
soon learned that he'd had an affair on and off for 6 years. And that the 23 days that I was on the road, his girlfriend was living in my house, sleeping in my bed, going through my drawers, looking at the books I had on my shelf, and all of that. And so he moved out right away. And I knew because I was a marriage counselor that it was over. I knew that there was no going to therapy. Anyhow, he was totally not interested. And so I suffered terribly. And it was a phenomenal betrayal because I had been given no indication at all that there was anything wrong, that he was thinking of leaving, that we were fighting, nothing like that. It just literally came out of the blue.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what sort of stimulated me to write the book. So I'd already written one book, and everyone
Mm-hmm.
kept saying, "You should write another book and call it Dumped." I didn't like the title. So I
Yeah.
changed it to Runaway Husbands. And then I started researching, and I found in the end, I had spoken to or heard from 400 women worldwide to whom this had happened. and learned that it's a very consistent pattern. The way the men leave, the way they just out of the blue in the middle of a mundane conversation about what we're having for dinner,
Mm-hmm.
they say, "That's it, I'm leaving." A large majority of them leave right then or have already left. I
Mm-hmm.
heard today from a woman who emailed me, and she said that she had been on the phone with her husband all day and everything was fine and he was very loving and everything. And when she got home from work, everything was gone from his side of the house, his side of the closet, and all of his things were gone. He'd already bought another house. He moved right into his other house that he already bought,
Oh.
that she knew nothing about. And so like that kind of a betrayal it's very devastating and very traumatic.
Well, I have a question here. Like we women, we have a gift of intuition. Usually we pick up on some subtle things, right? You said that your ex-husband was having an affair for 6 years. Do you think it's us being in denial or so trusting, like we're fine? Why are we missing some of those signs? I'm sure something was there. We just didn't accept, register them,
No.
or no?
But that's a remarkable thing. And the women, I now I'm leading a huge worldwide community of women who have experienced what I call wife abandonment syndrome.
Okay.
And the fact that I was a marriage counselor, that I am a marriage counselor and divorce counselor, and I didn't see it. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't see any signs. And okay, let alone the long hair in the bathtub. I didn't know how I overlooked that one sign. But I didn't see any signs because he didn't want to show me any signs. And
Okay.
that's because, and maybe it's because I was such a great wife, he was deciding, should I leave or should I stay?
Got it.
And so it's a particular kind of personality that these runaway husbands have, where they're going to be in it right up until the minute when the penny drops and they make the decision, I'm out of here, and then they leave running. They're
Mm-hmm.
gone within a day, usually within a week. Sometimes it's back and forth for a few months, but typically it's very, very quick. But it's a great question because everyone asks that question. But in reality, myself and the women in my community, he might have been irritable, he might have been in a bad mood, but we didn't
Mm-hmm.
think he's bolting out of here. And
Mm-hmm.
that's because the men who are fit this profile tend to be very engaged and attentive husbands.
Hmm. Well, it's like when women are in emotional abusive marriage. It's very
Yes,
hard to see. Like all the signs are there. It's like you said, it's by the book. It takes a specific personality, but women don't see it until they're out of it. And then they're
yes,
like, oh my gosh, I see this, I see this. But it's like there is a personality trait that takes to almost like blindside. You're living in some sort of different world.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's such a good way to put it. Um, and then, what happens after the husband leaves is the really dramatic part, which is that
Yes.
many, many of the husbands then turn on their wives
Oh,
and they say,
yes.
I never loved you. And that time we went to Italy and you thought we were having such a good time. I hated every minute of it. And they start denying her lived reality of her life. And in many of the husbands, they do everything they can to try to siphon off the money, to not give her, 50% or whatever her fair
Mm-hmm.
share is of their assets. They do a lot of things. It's like their feelings go from being on, and then the switch is flicked and off. They feel nothing for her. And it doesn't matter that she's crying and begging
Mm-hmm.
and asking him please to go to marriage counseling. And myself, like so many women in the community, I lost 30 pounds. I was emaciated by the end. I was really
Mm-hmm.
thin. And everyone loses like ridiculous amounts of weight because we're
Yes.
all in a traumatic, we've experienced this
Mm-hmm.
traumatic thing, but he doesn't seem to care. That's the important part.
Do you think he acts this way to almost like avoid accountability for his actions? Like he's almost like projecting and he's blaming you. Well, I didn't enjoy that anyways. It's almost like not wanting to face reality that he's the one accountable for whatever is happening. He doesn't want to feel guilty.
100%. It's all compartmentalization, so
Mm-hmm.
that he doesn't want to feel, he doesn't want to acknowledge what he's doing. because he can see how devastated she is. So rather than that, he's going to blame her. And he's going to, like one man wrote like a 5-page list of everything she had done wrong. And very often they're small things like she leaves too many crumbs on the counter, or, she doesn't make the bed every day, or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
That he's using because there's really not much else that she'd done that,
Mm-hmm.
and often, the underlying thing is the sexual excitement of having an affair, because almost all the men, are having affairs, and who can turn that down? So that
Mm-hmm.
they can't say to their wife, I'm leaving you because I'm really having a hot time with this secretary from my office. So instead, they have to say, I'm leaving you because you're like this and you're like that, and you're too
Mm-hmm.
controlling and you're like that. And so they don't want to feel the guilt and the sense of
Mm-hmm.
responsibility. So that's why they, like my ex-husband, he couldn't tolerate it. He said to me, I'm leaving right now. That was in the evening. I begged him to stay overnight. He stayed overnight on the sofa, and then he had to get out of there because he couldn't take it. Couldn't
Mm-hmm.
take, my desolation and my pain and suffering. And so then he shuts down. You can't reach him. They turn off their phone. They're out of touch.
So, do you have advice for your clients when, like you said, they lose all respect and interest in their soon-to-be former partner welfare? What about when it's the mother of the kids you share kids, and they still want to destroy you, even though they're the ones who chose to leave? Do you have advice for your clients how to survive that, how to deal with that emotionally and even financially?
Um, yeah, I mean that so often happens, that
Yes.
he's the father of the kids. A lot of times, my demographic, my average age is 53. So some of them are older, they have adult children. Some women in our community have younger children and are doing co-parenting with him.
Oh,
And it's brutal. I really feel
I
bad.
I know.
I really feel bad for the women who have to send their children to the girlfriend's house. He moves in with the girlfriend and has to go send the children to the girlfriend's house, a week on, week off. It's rough.
Yes.
But it's really what advice I have is first of all, for everyone needs to understand what happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a car accident, and somebody smashes from behind, you want to see, is there a witness? Did somebody see what happened? I need the truth. I need to know what happened. And we want somebody, a bystander, to say, no, you were stopped at a light and they smashed right into you. And
Yes.
then you're like, oh, that's good. It wasn't my fault. Um,
Yes.
so we all need to understand what happened to us. But because we're used to being, and this is also typical of the wives in our community, that we're empaths and we're
Yes.
accommodating. And so we let him lead a lot in the relationship. And so that he wanted to move to Chicago to go for a job. So, okay, we give up
Mm-hmm.
our job, we go with him. That we believe what he has to say. So
Mm-hmm.
then when he leaves and he's saying you were all these negative things, we have the tendency to believe it. And
Absolutely.
the first steps are to recognize that how does somebody go and morph overnight from a loving husband to an angry stranger? How do human beings do that? And that's the biggest question. Once you
Mm-hmm.
can recognize that George is no longer the same George he was last year, this is a different person, and don't expect to get his sympathy because he has none to give you.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to recognize that people can change and do change
Mm-hmm.
um, is really essential to being able to figure out where do I position myself now in relation to this man with whom I have to co-parent.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
So in my book, in Runaway Husbands, I have a whole chapter on co-parenting with the ex
Well,
and
that,
how
that
to
one
manage
is
that. Yeah.
that one is really challenging. For me, the most challenging, one of the most challenging parts when I left, I had to move out of the house. So he stayed in the house and he was bringing his new girlfriends in there. And when it was my house, still,
Yes.
like my name was on the title, but the girlfriend was there and acting in front of me as this is her place
Ah,
right now with
mm,
my kids
hurts so
there.
much. Oh my God. Hurts so
And
much
it
to see
was
again.
devastating. Like I was spinning. And you know what? Another thing was interesting. So, like you said, they turn on you.
Yeah.
because after I, like in my case, I was the one who left, but I don't
Yes.
think he was that blindsided. He started calling me all kinds of names, low life. I'm the one who
Yes.
destroyed the family. When girlfriend was gone, all of a sudden, babe, I will always love you. You're the best mom to the kids. Oh my gosh, you're the love of my life. And then I turned into low life again. And I'm like,
Yes.
oh my gosh, what is happening? It's very hard to emotionally process it because you do not understand what motivates them
Yes.
and like what is happening because you still have that connection. It takes years to break
Yes.
away
You're so right.
from that connection because I was married for 16 years. That's
Yes.
half of the lifetime of
Yes.
mine. So
Yes.
it is emotionally, it is such it's emotional, so difficult to go through and accept, understand. Am I a low life or am I
Yeah.
the love of the life? Like, what am I? Who am I outside of that
Yes.
relationship?
Yeah. Because his words have power.
Yes. Because for
And
16 years, for 20 years, that's all we knew. This was our dynamic. So you
yes.
trust your partner. So whatever they're saying, you believe it's to be true, but
Yes.
it's not.
Yeah, it's not. But part of that is in those cases, and I know it's not everybody, and it's not everybody in my community, but in those cases where there is another woman, very often men get their identity from their wives or girlfriends.
Mm-hmm.
So when he was in the marriage, he was with you. And I don't know in
Yes.
your particular case, but he was getting his identity. Women tend to have a variety of emotional support. We have
Yes.
our friends, we have maybe our sisters, we have maybe our mother. Well, we have a variety of emotional support, and men tend to get their emotional support from their wives. And a lot of men don't have like a big friend network or don't really turn to their sisters or brothers that much. Their
Mm-hmm.
primary emotional support is their wife. So then when they have this woman at work who says to him, "Oh, George, you're so interesting. Tell me that story," which you've heard 15 times, and he suddenly feels boosted and buoyed up and he feels
Yes.
alive again. It's very hard for him to turn that down. And so he detaches from you and he reattaches with her.
Yes.
And she's different. She likes to do these things. And whatever it is she wants to do, suddenly he's interested in doing those things, which he never
Mm-hmm.
wanted to do when he was with you,
Mm-hmm.
because he's making his emotional connection with the woman in his life.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, it's not everybody, but I see this
Yeah.
over and over again. And
It's
certainly in my case, where my husband was very adamant about certain things. And then when he was involved with his girlfriend, who was involved with other things, he suddenly took on all of her causes and
mm-hmm.
whatever was important to her.
It's interesting to me. It's almost like we become their PR representative. Like we,
Yeah.
and every woman is a different PR. So they
Yes.
become what we show to the world because this is
Yes.
a great image, right? When we
Yeah.
disappear, they're like, what happened? Who is this person? We don't know him, right? It's like, well, I was representing him. So
Yes.
uh yes. What's the difference? You mentioned in on your website that there is a huge difference between wife abandonment syndrome and just being abandoned. Why
Yes.
are those two different?
Well, I think it was more specifically between abandonment, wife abandonment
Hmm.
syndrome or abandonment, and the typical end of a marriage.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's where that dynamic is different. The typical end of a marriage, first of all, she saw it coming. She knew
Yes.
that they were fighting. Maybe they went to marriage counseling. Maybe they
Hmm.
talked the D word. Maybe they
Yes.
said, divorce, I can't take this anymore. I'm getting out of here. You got to pull it together. That she was aware that there was trouble in paradise. That was
Hmm.
a huge part of it. And the way that he leaves so suddenly, the way that he walks away so suddenly, that doesn't typically happen in a typical divorce because you've been chewing on this
Hmm.
for a long time. The effect on the community is much harder with wife abandonment, so that your friends think
True.
if George could leave her, could my husband leave me? Because she didn't
Mm-hmm.
have any warning.
Yes.
Um, there's no closure. Like in my case, my husband said, bye, I'm out of here, and was gone the next day. But in a typical divorce, you can talk to him, he's there. And it
Mm-hmm.
takes time, so that you have the option to try to talk things through and say what you feel and all of that. I'm looking at my list here. Oh,
Yeah.
in wife abandonment syndrome, he redefines the past. He tends to say it was never good, it was never a good marriage. That trip to California was, I hated every minute of it. And you're like, what? It
Mm-hmm.
really plays with your sense of reality.
Yes.
And so
Gaslighting.
it's the gaslighting. Exactly. Exactly.
So, what you've been describing, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this. A lot of times right now, we're hearing narcissist, narcissist, like this is such an overused term, but let's talk
Totally.
about the narcissistic personality disorder.
Yeah.
Do men like this typically are on the spectrum of that disorder? Because it seems like there is almost a discard stage and they
Yes.
just move on without thinking, and then they try to rewrite history so they don't have to feel the guilt and shame, and they
Yes.
blame somebody else, saying, oh,
Yes.
if not for you, like that would have worked out. So do you see that people who suddenly leave, husbands who abandon and run away, they
Yeah.
may be on the spectrum of that narcissistic personality disorder?
So, it's very interesting because I've been doing this work. My book, Runaway Husbands, came out initially in 2010. So
That's
right now
before
that's
all of this was like talked
15 years
about.
ago, right before all of this was what talked about. And about 5 years ago, I started hearing covert narcissist, covert narcissist, covert narcissist. And then I did the research on covert narcissism. And the thing that the covert side of the narcissism is that this is how a man can stay in a marriage for a long period of time, looking like he is, really involved in the marriage, but really not having a depth of connection.
Hmm.
And you only recognize the narcissistic traits after he leaves.
Yes.
When he shuts down, he doesn't care, he jumps from one woman to the next woman, and it's all about him. And so in the new edition of Runaway Husbands recently in 2023, I added a chapter on covert narcissism
Hmm.
because it really seems to fit our profile.
Yes.
And it's not everybody, and I don't think that my ex-husband was a covert narcissist. But, as a marriage counselor, I was once working with a man who had decided to leave his wife for an affair partner. And the
Hmm.
two of them came to me, the husband and wife came to me to discuss the end of their marriage. And he said to her, this is not your fault. I got distracted by this other woman. My feelings have changed, but I'm not going to blame you. You were a wonderful wife. You were a wonderful mother,
Oh, wow.
and I will always take care of you financially. You don't have to worry. And however, I do have to end the marriage. And that might, steam can out of my ear. I don't hear that too often as a marriage counselor. But you see, so that's an example of how a man can leave a marriage
Yes.
and not be a covert narcissist and not be abandoning her, but just we know that sometimes people evolve and change,
Hmm.
and marriages don't last forever sometimes. And that's a totally different story because he's treating her with dignity and
Yes.
respect.
Hmm.
And
Yes.
in our community, dignity and respect is in very short supply.
I honestly think it's almost like non-existent because I know like I'm out of my relationship for over 5 years and my ex-husband is still trying to destroy me on any level he can. And I'm like, isn't it time to kind of move on with your life? And
Yeah.
but like you said, there is no dignity, there is no respect. It's almost like there is an intent to just make sure that you become so dehumanized,
Yes.
and it's very easy to get that way, to become that way if you don't remove that noise. You understand this is just noise, this is
Yeah.
just words, But like we talked, it's so difficult to disconnect because you've been in this dynamic for so long. So it's almost you
Yeah.
have to have a very strong community to validate that this is noise. You should not believe what you are hearing from that
Yeah.
specific person.
Yeah, and that's very hard because after you've been together 16 years, you go back to that default position of what
Yes.
it used to be, and maybe it's me. Maybe I was too controlling. I probably was very controlling. I like to
Hmm.
be in charge, very controlling in that I cooked all the food, I cleaned everything up. He'd say, "Where do you want to go on vacation?" I'd say, "Here," and he'd say, "Okay." So then he can call me controlling because he let me
Yes.
make all the decisions. But that's okay. You want to leave me, do it in a different way.
Yes.
Do it in a way that's respectful. Do it in a different way. Say to
Hmm.
me, Vicky, you've been great, but my feelings have changed, and it's not because
Hmm.
you're the most horrible woman on earth.
Why do the men usually live in my limited understanding? I always think men used to leave, usually leave for another woman.
Yes,
Women usually leave for peace. It's not for another
yes,
man. It's just, I'm done with this. I need to find myself again. While men usually leave for another partner.
yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So when I first started the research for runaway husbands, I was going to call it runaway spouses. And I was researching men who leave and women who leave. And what I found out was that there were ample examples of men who walk out of relationships that where there was no problem, where they weren't fighting, where it seemed relatively calm, but that when women leave, usually they've been saying for years,
Hmm.
I'm not happy. You're not giving, you have no time for me. Could we spend some time together? You're always on your phone. You're not interested. I feel alone. I'm raising these kids. I feel like I have three children instead of just two. That the women have been
Yes.
saying for years, what their gripes are,
Hmm.
and it doesn't come out of the blue. And because it was a very different dynamic, and for the women, there seemed to be real reasons why they chose to leave, and the men knew about it, but they let it go over their
Yes.
head. They didn't lock onto it. They didn't let it penetrate, get in there. And so then I decided, no, the runaway husbands, all of the women practically have the same story to tell. And so I
Yes.
focused on that because it's very different.
Well, women usually, we as women, we have a really long runway. We're
Yes,
going to try, they call it nagging, but
yes,
we're trying to get heard. Please
yes,
listen to us. But when switch is off, when we reach the end of the runway, we're done. There is no comeback from
yes,
that. So
yes,
women tend to grieve the relationship, the loss of family, while we're still in it because we see the breakage happening, and there's
yes,
nothing that we can do. And we try the marriage counseling,
yes,
but if the husband comes in, they're like, everything's fine. I do not know. She's just nagging.
yes,
And then when we leave, they're like, wait, what?
yeah, exactly.
um, but for men, that's why I'm saying when they find almost like something shiny, more exciting,
Yes,
they jump into that. And a lot of times it sounds like there are no warning signs. They just like, poof, that sounds more exciting. She wants me more.
yes. But I mean, and I always find it's important to just mention this, that, we don't often talk about the sexual relationship in
Hmm.
marriages, but it's so primary. And so very often when a man has been sleeping with the same woman for 27 years, like there's nothing new going on there. Nobody's ripping each other's clothes off. It's like, wait a minute, let me get into my pajamas. I'll be there in a few minutes, sweetheart. It's not the same thing as having an affair where
I
you're in the
agree.
hotel in the illicit room and you're wearing your best underwear and you're really, you're doing this thing. So that for a lot of men, and particularly the sort of the men who are in their late 50s or early 60s or something, they look around and they see the end coming.
Hmm.
They feel like, oh, great, now soon I'm going to have to start taking Viagra. Women can
Yes.
function until they're 90. It's fine. Just be there. You can function.
Hmm.
Men, not so much. They get nervous. Women don't relate to that, but men get nervous that they need more stimulation in order to really function. And so they look around and they say, I've been a good husband. I've been a good father. I've been a good worker. I've mowed the lawn. I coach the soccer team. When is it
Mm-hmm.
my turn? When do I get to be James Bond? And then when they have the opportunity to have an affair, either because they sought one out or one came to them,
Mm-hmm.
then suddenly they feel like, "Ping, I'm alive again."
Yes.
And, that's it.
But in order for him to be a James Bond in a relationship, you need to act like one. It seems like a lot of things are put on a woman. Oh, you are not putting the best lingerie for me. You are not
Yes.
seducing me. And you're sitting in the underwear that is like 10 years old,
I
stretched out. You haven't worked out in weeks. And you're saying I have to like seduce that?
know.
Like, come
I
on.
love
I
that,
love you, honey,
Ksenia.
but not that much at this
So
point.
much. I love that, Ksenia. You're so right. That's so well put.
So that's
Really
why I'm
good.
like, when
Yeah.
another woman, oh, you do not know what you're getting, honey. But okay,
Yeah.
like it seems like a very one-way street. A lot of
Yeah.
effort is put, it seems like assigned to a woman to
Yes.
seduce the men
Yes.
versus the opposite. And you're like, no, you need to create the mood
Yes.
for the seduction because
Exactly. You
recently
have to
I was looking.
participate.
Yes,
Yeah.
recently I saw one interesting chart, about how our hormones go up and down. And when we're younger, it's pretty predictable every like 28 days. When
Mhm.
we get into like our 40s, 50s, it's like child scribble. So you really need to like understand that there
Uh-huh.
is a lot going on here,
Yeah. Yes.
So create the mood so our
Yes.
hormones like become more balanced a little bit.
Yes.
But yes, I agree with you. Sexual interest is
Yes.
very important. And it's almost like it makes them feel like a man again because, oh,
Yes.
somebody wants me. Even if he cannot get it up without Viagra. Like
Yes.
it's just, it's sad. I think it's sad that instead of trying and experimenting at home, and I get it when it becomes mundane because we've been married
Yeah.
for so long,
Sure.
but even having the curiosity,
Yes.
I think that's important. And that's when I think the laziness and complacency comes into play.
Yes.
And men tend to blame it on women, which
Yes.
I completely disagree with.
Yeah. I think that's so well put. Yeah. Really, really good point. I
Uh,
agree with
I- so another question, when it comes to like, okay, so women left behind and now she's trying to rebuild her life. So there is a lot of emotional turmoil. The heartbreak is devastating. I actually think emotional pain is way more challenging to overcome than physical pain. Physical
you.
pain
Mhm.
heals and we tend to forget. Emotional, there is always like the crack that
Yeah.
like hurts. There's always,
Yes.
it's there. How can women trust again that
Oh,
it's
yeah.
not going to happen to them, or whether they
Yes.
were in an abusive relationship, they're not going to hurt them again?
Yes.
I trusting part, like for me right now, also for dating, is terrifying.
Yes.
Terrifying.
Yeah. Okay. So, um, everyone in my community asks that question.
Hmm.
And this is what I say. First of all, a subsequent relationship is not going to be like your first relationship.
Okay.
And I know with my ex-husband, we fell madly in love. The
Hmm.
sun set, on us. It was like so romantic, and we were so madly crazy in love. And hopefully, and now as a marriage counselor for 40 years, I know that very often those relationships that start with the limerence phase, that phase of like crazy, madly in love, often it's not really the best predictor of a long-term
Hmm.
marriage. So you'd want to be looking for a marriage where you get to know each other. You start off a little bit, the temperature a little bit down in more reality. Secondly, usually in after you're 40 or 50, he had a previous relationship.
Yes.
And so if he's divorced, you can look at what happened. What happened? Let me do your research. What happened in that previous relationship? How does he talk about his ex-wife? Does he call her the bitch, the cow? How does he talk about his ex-wife? If you're going to hear him diminishing and being disrespectful towards his ex-wife, then that tells you a lot about the kind of man that he is.
Hmm.
And so, and thirdly, you now know that it's possible for somebody to walk away like that.
Hmm.
And so that you'll never have that shock again. And you have to be comfortable in your own skin. After he leaves, you gotta work on getting comfortable in your own skin, being happy in your own life, and having meaning in your own life. And
Yes.
then if you want to add a man into that mix, okay. But he's not going to be the be all and end all that your ex-husband was. Which is
Mm-hmm.
not to say that you're not going to have an important relationship. I'm in a long-term, 18 years subsequent relationship since my husband left.
Mm-hmm.
And I say to him, look, you want to leave me? Fine. Just give me some notice. Just
Mm-hmm.
let me know. And I'm not worried about that right now. But if that were to happen, I know that I won't be devastated to the same degree because I've built out my life. My life is well
Mm-hmm.
built. I have so much going on, and the work and the friends and all of the whole Megillah. And that's where I'd like women to be, so that we can add a man into our lives, but not feel as though he's going to define me. That
Yes.
he's going to give me my worth. No, nobody else gives you your worth anymore. You get your worth from yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't get to define you and tell you who you are and whether you're valuable or not. He's just a
Mm-hmm.
guy. He might be a real sweetheart and you love having him with you, but he doesn't define who you are.
That's true. And it's you brought up such a good point. When we were younger, and even now, like when there is a sexual chemistry through the roof, the fireworks, that tends to say it's not going, usually those relationships don't work in the long run because it's based on more like sexual chemistry
Yes,
than the deeper connection. Because in my dating history right now, there was out of men I have seen and dated, there was just one that my body felt relaxed. There was no fireworks. It was just so peaceful. And I was, oh my gosh, I feel like a woman again. It was almost, I felt treasured
yes,
versus being kind of looked at, oh my gosh, and drool all over
yeah,
the face? It is very different. But now when I am searching that feeling, I have not seen that again.
yes,
But now I know what to look for. The positive out of that came out. I understand how more secure and more mature relationships are supposed to be like. Listen, the sexual
yes,
chemistry is amazing. Like you said, it's so important to have in our life. Like sex life is
yeah,
important. However, there has to be a deeper connection before
yes,
that comes in and complements
yes,
us.
yes, yeah, yeah. No, definitely that's true. So
Do
trust again, you have two ways of approaching it. One is to trust again, and you open yourself to risk because
Yes.
there's no guarantees. Two is to put up a wall and not trust again, and then be alone all the time,
Yes.
and not let anybody in. So each person has to make her own decision. That's what's her comfort zone. There's nobody. You don't have to have another man or woman. Sometimes you
Mm-hmm.
might want to you might want to segue into
Switch.
Wednesday, but you don't necessarily have to have a relationship to be happy in
Yes.
life. But if you
Mm-hmm.
want a relationship, you're going to have to accept the fact that there aren't any guarantees and that there is an element of risk. But hey, that's life.
I Are there any red flags that you just kind of noticed with that type of relationship of runaway husbands? Like, is there a specific red flag that right now you're like, yep, now I know?
You mean for a woman who's married right now, for her to be, yeah. Okay. So
Yes.
the simple red flags is, I mean, this is what is typical in our community. Happened with my husband. Suddenly he was buying like gym clothes, like red
He starts
gym
working
clothes,
out. Yes.
and he's working out, and it's like he would never buy that. He went shopping with her. And so he started working out. Another client of mine, her husband lost 75 pounds and had I don't know, the surgery, the bariatric surgery,
Mm-hmm.
and lost all of that weight and then felt, he started really working on himself. Not to say that every man who joins a gym is going to leave you, but if he's really adamant about it and it's really not his character, you might think, what's going on? Secondly, is he talking about somebody from the office? Very often, the affair partner's in the office. And
Mm-hmm.
he's saying, oh, this girl, she's so funny. She said this funny thing. If her name comes up a little bit too often, in a very innocuous kind of way, it doesn't necessarily mean something, but it could be a red flag. I mean, of course, if he disappears and he's gone for an hour or two and you don't know where he is, from time to time, you might you might say that that's a red flag. That
Mm-hmm.
that's a thing. If he takes his phone with him into the bathroom because he doesn't want to leave it there, different things, now with the
Mm-hmm.
phone, which is so often the way that people find out about affairs, because
Mm-hmm.
the text pops up while he's in the bathroom and the wife is at the breakfast table reading the text. Um,
Yes.
and yeah, so that, I mean, those are the soft signs, but sometimes it's hard to really define.
It's interesting you mentioned about the gym because I not personally know the couple, but I was following on Instagram and I saw it was a few years ago. Out of the blue, the husband just got into jacked shape, and I'm like, they're gonna get divorced soon. Sure enough, a few years later, they're separated, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I called it. It just, I'm like,
It's
out of the
true.
blue, it's
Yeah,
true. Like,
yeah,
one thing is you constantly kind of like just working out, keeping in shape. But
yeah,
when you were not into a marathon or competition out of the
yeah.
blue, when you're still married, you're
Something
something that
funny.
keeps you motivated to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah, that's it.
What about kids? How do kids handle something like this sudden of a breakup? I mean, if it's a blind side for a wife, I can't even imagine what it's like for kids when they're involved.
Yes. So, a large issue in my community are the adult children who either become very protective of the mother.
Okay.
It's not unusual for the children to become estranged from the father. For the adult children's relationship with the father goes through a rocky period. And they feel like you're supposed to be the person who taught me morality and told me not to lie, and you've been lying and cheating for 2 years with your girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
Or, and this is not unusual, the father's girlfriend is uncomfortably close in age with the 25-year-old daughter. And that's like icky, that's
Yes.
really uncomfortable. And that happens a lot where, where the girlfriend is 15 years younger than the father and the daughter is 22 years younger than the father or something. And, that,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't feel good. And so, unfortunately, and I say that because I think everyone needs to have two parents, but it does tend to take a hit on the relationship between the fathers, or the father gets all involved with the girlfriend and her children, and he's
Yes.
living with the girlfriend and her children, and it feels like he lost interest in his children, or it's too hard to see his children because that means dealing with the ex-wife, and he can't take it. And he doesn't want the children holding his feet to the fire and saying, how come you said this and you said you were there and you really weren't there, and
Mm-hmm.
why are you doing this, and I don't respect you. And he doesn't want to have to answer those questions from his wife. He also doesn't want to have to answer those questions from the kids. So this is a huge topic in the community, is this disruption of the relationship. On the other side, I don't want to talk too much about it because it's a huge topic, are those children who are comfortable going with dad and the new wife to the Bahamas, and the mother feels betrayed,
Mm-hmm.
very hurtful.
It's rough.
Dad is buying the kid a car or something. She doesn't want to say no. Or the dad is just a really fun guy. And so the kid wants to hang out with the dad. And the mother feels as though it's a betrayal.
Yes.
And so it's a very delicate topic, and each situation is different.
I agreed, especially when you have younger kids and you have to co-parent and the new partner comes into play and the kids seem to be there. It feels, it's devastating. It's really
Totally.
hard to accept that there is another woman and that woman may try to pretend to be a parent. She tries to parent too much and you're spinning. It is
Yes.
such a challenging dynamic for a woman. And I think for a man it may be a little easier because they haven't carried the kids for 9 months. Like
Yes.
it's different. Like men as a dad, yeah,
Different
you
relationship.
probably love
Yeah.
your kids, but women, there is always umbilical cord that is
Yeah.
unbreakable
Yes.
between mom and kids.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I worked with one woman. She said her daughter, who was like 9, came back from dad's house and she was wearing braids.
Hmm.
So
Yes.
the other woman did her hair and, and put it in braids. And the kid comes back from dad's house and the mom knows that it's not dad who did the braids, that it's Trudy who did the braids. And that really hurt so badly to see her kid, it's all excited about her hairstyle that was done by this. It's really, really my heart, the women in our community who are co-parenting back and forth with kids,
Yes.
they have all of my love and respect. I really feel for them.
Does it get better when kids are 18? Do you see that in your community that when kids graduate and they go to college and the kind of dynamic of 1 week on, 1 week off, dealing with co-parent disappears? Do women get more comfortable
Yeah,
in being
sometimes.
basically a mom to older kids, or it's still like there is trigger there?
No, well, there's always a trigger, particularly if the kids have this loyalty to the dad as well. And
Yes.
now they're on their own. They don't need mom's permission to go to dad's country place.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're free to go when they feel like it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's complicated, but the complications change over
Yeah.
time.
So do you have just like close it off one positive advice or like how to get for women who are going through it, like one piece of advice, whether it gets better or how to manage when they're really in the dark spot, just to get through it.
100%. And really, what everything that's thrown at us in life is really a challenge for us to work on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that when this thing happens, we all have to work on ourselves. We have to try to control our obsessive mind. We have to try to breathe. We have to learn to do meditation. We have to do all of this work on ourselves that we wouldn't have had to do when we were still married. Because in the final analysis, it comes down to how you want to live your life, the kind of person that you want to be, the values that you want to live by, and that you want to put those things front and center in your life,
Mm-hmm.
and really choose to live by those morals, those values, and use this crisis of abandonment as an opportunity for growth and change. And I hear about it all the time. And for those women who are early on, like in the first year, if they've experienced wife abandonment syndrome, certainly in the first 6 or 8 months, and you feel so badly, and you have this, what you said it earlier, it's just so true, is that emotional pain is physical pain. You
Mm-hmm.
feel it inside you, it's stuck inside you, you feel like this pain is never going to leave, but it will leave. Life will go on, and you will have a new chapter, and it might be a very nice chapter. So it's just having faith and trusting that life will go on and that you are going to move beyond this period of time in your life. And you're going to work hard to make it beautiful.
That is so beautifully said. It's true. It always it there is the only way is up right now. You're
Yes,
already
yes.
down.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Vicky, thank you so much for being with us here today, and thank you for sharing your story and how to manage this. It's brutal
Yes.
transition of life.
I've loved
Um,
talking with you, Ksenia. Like you really get it.
I do.
It's been such an interesting conversation. I just want to say that if anybody wants to learn more, our website
Yes,
is runawayhusbands.com. It's
I will.
plural, runawayhusbands.com. Yeah.
I will include everything in the links and all the listeners. If you learn anything, please share and subscribe and please check out the book. And now I have to read it too because I think there is so many similarities between whether
Yes.
we choose to live or whether we're left behind. The pain
Yes.
is similar. Not it's the same. We all experience pain, but better days ahead. And again,
Yes.
Vicky, thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate you, and thank you for listening to Uncoupled and Unfiltered, guys. Until next time.
Take care.
That's it for this episode of Uncoupled and Unfiltered. If you're loving the raw truth and practical takeaways, do the badass thing and rate and review the show wherever you listen. It helps more good people find their way out of the chaos. And check the show notes. Yeah, we actually put some useful stuff in there. Resources, links, tools, go grab what you need. Until next time, don't settle, don't shrink, and don't look back.